Good morning, everyone. This is Ria Pramanik, and we are learning about BPSC 146 conflict resolution and peace building. So, we have done till Unit 5 in our previous sessions. Today, we will be learning about new chapters, that is Unit 6, that is about the role of government and civil society. So, in this unit, we will be learning about how the government functions and how civil society plays a very important role in, solving the conflict and bringing peace. So, they have made constant efforts to bring peace in the society. Let's know about state and government. In present times, we all live in states. So here, states means a country, and not within a country there are a few units which we call as states. Here we are saying state, and we meant it by country. So, in present times, we all live in states. A state is a political system that has sovereignty, independent legal authority over a population in particular territory. So, what is a state? It is a political system. This is very important. Kindly note it down that a state is a political system which is compulsorily having sovereignty, that is independent legal authority over the population which is living in the state in a particular territory. So each state has its own boundary, they have their own territories, and within those territories the population is there, and the state has independent legal authority over that population. It is based on the recognized right to self determination. This is also very much important to that, because this is something which we recognize. The state is a recognized authority which has right to self determination. Sovereignty. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty in practice rests with those who have ultimate right to make political decisions. So, to know it better, let's take an example that before independence, India was a colony of Britishers. At that time, we can't say that India is a sovereign country. Why? Because India's political decisions was not taken by the population which is living there, is not taken by any Indian which is who is living in the country, but by a foreign country, that is Britishers. So at that time, India was not a sovereign country, but it became after independence, because from that time onwards, India take its political decisions on its own. So they are known as government. And in that sense, it is the physical and visible form of the state. So according to Andrew Haywood, the term government comes from govern. This definition is also very important. So Andrew Haywood is a very important scholar who have read about state and government. And according to him, the term government comes from govern. In its broadest sense, to govern means to rule or control others. So, what does we mean by govern? Govern means to rule and control others. Government can, therefore, be taken to include any mechanism through which ordered rule is maintained. So, its central feature is to being the ability to make collective decisions and the capacity to enforce them. So, this is what is the central feature of government, that is to it should be able to make collective decisions and the capacity to enforce those decisions. So it is more commonly understood to refer to the formal and institutional processes which operate in the state to maintain public order and facilitate collective action. So let's talk about what is the core functions of government. The core functions of government is to make the law, implement that law, and interpret that law. So legislation, executive, and judiciary, this is very very important. So to make law, it stands as legislation. To implement that law is known as execution, and to interpret that law is adjudication. So in some cases, the political executive alone is referred to as the government, making it equivalent to the administration. The existence of state has been considered as a necessity to provide security of life and property of citizens. So, in due course, its role has also been extended to provide welfare, that is, to manage availability of essential needs of life like health, education, minimum material needs, etc. So, For performance also, maintenance of order and peace is essential. So what is the most essential thing that a government should do is to maintain the order in the society, and the society should be peaceful. These are the most essential criteria to maintain. Only the state, therefore, it's visible from the government, has the authority to use force and exercise control over resources. Now let's move on to the conflicts and state. So, state or government provides a binding framework to hold the society together by maintaining the law and order for preservation of peace. So, the ultimate goal of a state or a government is to maintain peace in the society, and for that, they need to maintain the law and order within the state. So, the government, as the visible agency of the state, enjoy a monopoly in performing this function, as no other institution or association in a society has similar power and function. So, conflicts in any society are a major threat to peace. So, whenever we are saying that the preservation of peace is very essential for a society, here the antonym of peace is conflicts. So, the conflicts is considered to be as a very, very major threat to the peace in the society. So, these may be at various levels of a various reasons. So, there are many reasons why conflict arises, and that we have discussed in our previous sessions also. That what are the reasons why conflict arises, we have done it. So, you may be able to recollect it, and you can connect here in this chapter also. So these may occur either due to, so what are the things? Let's revise. These may occur either due to the innate human nature, due to the clash of human nature, such as individuals enter into relationship either at the family or wider community levels. There is also issues or sharing available resources. So resources are also a cause of conflict because they are something which is very scarce and people are fighting over that. So what are these resources which is very, very essential for a person to live? It is water, property, food, etc. The fourth reason why a conflict may occur because of that is maintenance of threat to identities. So, whenever there is a threat to identity of a individual, there is a concern of conflict, because conflict may arise because that individual want to have its identity to be recognized. So, there can be disputes between individuals, groups, communities, or regions with regard to access to resources. So we have read in our previous session that how resources is one of the major cause why conflicts arises. So there are violent conflicts also, and non-state groups that are organized along a shared communal identity, caste, religion, linguistic, etc. They are also involved. So such violent community conflicts between groups often causes high casualties and severe disruption of livelihoods. So the violence is always a very problematic thing, because that considered that is something which is very harmful for a society, and its casualties are very high and they disrupt a people's life. So in worst case, it also destabilizes the entire region or state into civil war. So one conflict which arises a very small level can also escalate towards to a civil war. So for example, it happened earlier also. For example, in Sri Lanka, Bosnia, Kosovo, Rwanda, Chechnya, and South Sudan. So these are the countries where these kind of conflicts, which were small initially but later turned into a civil war. So at times, even non-violent disputes can escalate to violence or social harmony. Suppose there is a conflict going on, which is very, very non-violent. There is no place for violence on those protests and conflicts, but it can later escalate into a violence. So there is also possibilities for that. So as the primary duty of the state, it is to ensure, as we are repeatedly mentioning, that it is the primary duty of the state, first of all, to maintain the law and order, basically, and most importantly, in the situation of violent conflict. Also, the government has the primary non-partisan function of ensuring to return of peace and normalcy. So it is the government which should ensure that once a conflict happened, there should be peace and normalcy, which should be returned to the society, so that again a peaceful society can be created. So in case of non-violent disputes, also state has the duty to get them resolved. So whether the conflict or dispute is violent or non-violent, that doesn't matter. For a state, it is its duty to resolve those issues, those conflicts, because ultimately it is hampering the peace. So such violent community conflicts between groups often cause high casualties and disruption, as we have already discussed. So this is how the state functions. So the governments may respond to conflicts in several ways as adjudicator, mediator, and peacekeeper, or as enforcers of law also, either by persuasive means or use of force. So there is also possibilities that there is a conflict going on, and what is the role of the government? It should respond to that conflict on many ways. They can interpret, and they can involve in a conflict in many ways. The government can become an adjudicator. It can also play a role of a mediator or a peacekeeper. So these are the roles that a state or a government can play to respond to a conflict. So at times, state even becomes a participant in the conflict. So suppose there is an individual clash or group clash which is going on, but ultimately the state maximum of times also become the participant of the conflict, because it get involved in the conflict because it wanted to solve the issue, and that is how it also get itself included in the conflict. So in general, due to its control over national resources and security forces, the government is expected to be not only a key player, but at times the only player in managing conflicts. So, why people are very, very dependent on the government and the state? Because it has national resources and also the most possible security forces which is there with the government, and that is how the conflicts wanted them to play a very important role in managing the conflicts. So this way, for this may be both formal institutional or non-institutional or informal way through which state can get included. Now let's talk about the main institutions. So in any country, there can be several institutions and instrumentalities whose mandate is and who can deal with potential and actual conflict situations. So there are many institutions which play a very important role in managing a conflict situation. And some of these may have been provided in the constitution itself. So you can find also it in the constitution. Others can be constituted through statutes and executive orders. So suppose some kind of conflict is not mentioned earlier during the time when constitution was framed, but there are possibilities that because to handle new kind of conflict, the government should constitute through statutes and executive order how to solve that conflict. So these institutes can play a role in prevention, management, resolution, and subsequent prevention of conflicts. So this is how it works. Broadly speaking, executional institutions include lawmaking bodies, the executive, the judiciary, and other specific types of conflict resolution institutions. So there are statutory or other institutions which includes various commissions, bodies or structures created by law or executive orders in general for specific areas and types of conflict. So this is how these statutory and other institutions are being formed so that they can deal with the conflict situation. Now let's talk about law-making bodies. So law-making bodies known as legislatures, assemblies and parliaments, etc. occupy a key position in the machinery of the government, because this is the place where the laws are being framed. So the main function of the legislature are to frame policies and enact laws, as we have discussed. So with this regard to the conflict, the legislature has to create the framework for curtailing, reducing, and avoiding conflict. So it is the duty of the legislature or assemblies to formulate some kind of policies and some kind of laws which can ultimately curtail, reduce, and avoid the conflict. Because the ultimate goal of the state, as I'm repeating again and again, is to maintain law and order and peace. So for doing that, they need to do many other work on the legislature level so that they can control the conflict. So the main concern of legislatures is prevention and empowerment of other bodies for management and resolution of conflicts. So the legislature also plays a very, very important role of changing and enacting laws to ensure better social and economic environment conducive to the avoidance of social conflict. So there is always a possibility that the legislature is enacting laws so that it can avoid conflict. It can, they can just on they can distribute the resources properly. They can put restrictions on many activities which can lead to a conflict. They can also provide punishments on violation of such laws. So through these kinds of laws that is made in the legislature or assemblies are very very important to solve the conflict or to reduce the impact of the conflict. So laws may also empower executive and other bodies to enforce laws using force or other means, and judiciary and like bodies to adjudicate in cases of disputes. They can also award punishments on violation of laws and causing violence, etc. So this legislature may also can create institutions and bodies for resolution of conflicts or for taking measures to prevent those. So suppose there is a conflict going on, the legislature is having power to create institutions which can be dealing with these conflicting issues. So there is National Commission for Minorities, Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Commission, and such other bodies that is created by the Parliament of India, which can be cited as examples of this. So, as we have discussed, that legislature create institution so that they can prevent the reason why the conflict is arising. So, this is the example: the National Commission for Minorities, Scheduled Caste, and Scheduled Tribes, because there are many identities who are represented by these communities, and that is why there is more possibilities of issues, more possibilities of conflict between them, and that is why there is a particular commission which is being formed, which can be handling the issues that they are facing. Now let's talk about the executive. So in modern states, the executive branch is far the most complex and the most powerful branch of government. This is very important. You should note it down. So generally, there are two wings of the executive. The one is the political and the bureaucratic. So executive, technically, the branch of government that is responsible for the execution and implementation of policy. So suppose legislature is there who is making a policy, making a law, and it is the duty of the executive to implement it. So technically, the branch of the government which is responsible for execution or implementation of policy is basically the executive. However, its responsibilities are substantially broader, particularly in the context of conflict management and peace building, peacekeeping. It is the immediate agent of conflict resolution, the executive. In that, the key function of the political executive is to direct and control the policy processes. In short, again, Andrew Hay would say that the executive is expected to govern. So the bureaucracy is the other part, bureaucracy is the other wing, which is the administrative machinery of the state, the civil servants and public officials who are charged with the execution of government business. So both civil bureaucracy and police forces work under the directives and controls of the political executive, and they are the one who control the situation. Now let's talk about the police, the main organ of the executive in its task of conflict management and resolution is the police. So it is the monopoly of the sub-agent of government to use force, and it should be with the civil services having the role of overall supervision. So it is the bureaucracy or the bureaucrats who is there, who have cleared the civil services exams, who can be supervising the monopoly of the sub-agent of the government or to use force, and that is the police. So the central purpose of a police force is to maintain domestic order. And on one hand, they are concerned with the protecting citizens from each other, and on the other, the preservation of the authority of the state and ensuring that its jurisdiction extends throughout the community. So in this, it performs the functions of controlling social unrest and civil disorder. In both cases, it also includes enforcement of criminal law. So, this is how Andrew Haywood brings out that in case of managing conflict, particularly violent conflict, Andrew Haywood said that fire brigade policing. So, this is how police behave like a fire brigade, because the conflict is so big, so violence is there. So, to control it, he named it as fire brigade policing. So this emphasizes the capacity of the police to react to breaches of law when they occur, in the hope that crime will be prevented by the effectiveness of police response. Now let's come to the judiciary. So the judiciary is the branch of government that is empowered to decide legal disputes. The central function of judiciary is therefore to adjudicate, as we have read in our previous slides. And also judiciary is empowered to award punishments in case of violation of law. So whenever there is a violation of law cases that comes up, it is the judiciary which has power to award punishments to them who break laws, who violate laws. So, in terms of conflict management, judiciary settles the disputes between private individuals regarding sharing of resources, claims over property, money, jurisdiction, etc. So, the judiciary also performs the function of deciding criminal cases, also that which case is criminal and which is not. So, judiciary also directs the state to redress the grievances of groups or communities, thereby preventing possibilities of agitations, uprisings, and violence. Now let's talk about other constitutional agencies. So apart from three core agencies that we have read now of the government, the constitution of a state can also provide for other agencies which are empowered to adjudicate the disputes between individuals or groups or even the levels of the government. So for instance, in India, for resolution of disputes between center and state, there is a provision for constitution of interstate council under Article 263. So there are also conflict that arises between the center and the state. Center is the central government. And on the other hand, there are many states in India, and because of that, there are many reasons why states and center has disputes. And because to solve that dispute, India took position and they have created an interstate council which will be solely working to solving the dispute between the center and the state. There is also election commission which is empowered for resolution of disputes in some cases of disputes connected with elections. So when there is a conflict that is because of elections and related to elections, it is election commission which will be handling that part. Instead, there can be constitutional bodies of different types of empowered to adjudicate or mediate to resolve the disputes, and their functions of such bodies are generally limited to adjudicate on disputes with regard to claims or complaints. Now let's talk about the method and strategies. The state has gradually evolved to provide framework for orderly organization of society. And we have discussed that various institutional devices are there through which the government manages the conflict. And though families, non-state agencies, civil society groups may also play an important role in resolution of conflicts, the government is the final agency to deal with the conflict. Please note it down. So for that, the methods and strategies available with the state include enforcement, ad- adjudication, mediation, and persuasion. Now let's discuss about enforcement. So for the government, most important task in all cases is maintenance of law and order. And therefore, while it is important that the government take all possible measures to prevent the occurrence of violent conflicts, it is important that peace is restored at the earliest. So the ultimate goal is to solve the conflict and bring back peace, but at the earliest. So for government, resort to use of force. So government many times use force to bring back peace in the society. Generally local civil police is used for that. So it is on the local civil police which use force to settle the conflict. In cases of serious cases or escalation of violence, paramilitary forces or even army can be called to restore order. So initially, it is the duty of this local civil police who are responsible to manage the conflict. But if there is, this case is very serious and where there is the local civil police are not capable of controlling that conflict, then comes the paramilitary forces or army, which ultimately handles the conflict. Basically, the violent conflicts. So, as violence and riots are violation of criminal laws, the perpetrators and participants are apprehended and prosecuted also. So, there is also a chances of happening. So, the let's talk about the adjudication. So, what does that mean? What do you mean by adjudication? It is about the rightfulness of the claim between disputing parties. So this can be regard to claims over property between two or more individuals, sharing of resources like river waters between two group or more states or the regions, or many times propriety claims between the groups. So the adjudication can be both through judicial and quasi-judicial processes. So the government may also have authorities to send disputes and claims for adjudication to quasi-judicial bodies such as the tribunals and commissions constituted either for the matters in general or specific cases. Now let's talk about the mediation and persuasion. So mediation and persuasion are internal methods that the government can use to prevent and de-escalate or resolve the conflicts. So mediation and persuasion is a very important tool which is used by the government to prevent any conflict which turns violent majorly. So the government through the agencies and representatives can bring parties in dispute on table to among talk among themselves, negotiate and agree on the solution. So the police and civil officials also plays a very important role here, and they can impress upon community leaders to maintain peace and use lawful and peaceful methods for redressal of their grievances. So the governments can also involve civil society and non-government organizations to mediate and impress upon the necessity for maintenance of peace. So in democratic societies, government is expected to use such informal methods to the maximum to avoid use of force and possible violation of citizens' rights. Such informal methods are important even after restoration of peace, which can be done through police and military actions so that they can rebuild the social harmony in the society and restore confidence among the victims in particular and society at large. So what is important is that mediation and persuasion is carried out by persons and officials of high social standing and credibility who use their legitimacy and facilitative skills rather than manipulative and sanctioning to reach agreement. So this is how it is important that mediation and persuasion is done by the persons or officials who have high social standing and not because they have that legitimacy to solve that issue. Now let's talk about redressal. A number of social and communal conflicts are result of real or perceived feelings of discrimination, denial of rights, claims or non-consideration of demands by groups, communities or the sections of society. So these are the reasons why communal conflict arises, because there is a kind of discrimination which is happening. They can also be denied of their rights and claims. They can be, they are considered to be non-consideration of demands by the groups are demanding, and when you are not considering their demand, there is also possibility of communal conflict. There is also possibility that there is discrimination going on from years and years, and because of that discrimination people now rose their voices, and there is communal conflict that ultimately leads towards that. So the government, in addition to persuade citizens, also has the obligation to promote social good and undertake positive functions. So you might have noticed agitations and conflicts on issues of reservation, religious rights, or claims over resources, etc. You might have noticed that. So the government are expected to be non-partisan observers and policy makers. So various complaints and demands need to be given a patient hearing, looked into appropriately and responded properly. So this is a very important task that is being done by the government, that they need to listen to the demands of the people very patiently, and also they should also appropriately respond to that. So the governments cannot accept all claims or succumb to pressures, but need not resort to coercion at once. So if mediation, persuasion and acceptance of reasonable extent fail, then the government has to enforce the law of the land and maintain peace. Now let's talk about participant government, a critique. So it is the responsibility of the state and government to ensure the maintenance of peace and law and order in society. So this is how what is the responsibility which lies with the state and the government is to maintain peace and law and order in the society. So within that framework, it also has to work as a conflict manager who can manage the conflict. So in that state is expected to act neutrally, not taking sides. So this is very, very important, that in a conflict, the state, the government cannot take a side. And because they if they take a side, the conflict can also become very big, and it can turn into a violent one, because state should act neutrally. They should not be taking any side, there should not be biases. However, at times the government, including its institutions and officials, become involved and are implicated in the conflict. So their participation is by default. This occurs where state policies or decisions trigger to exacerbate conflict. So there are also many conflicts which arises because of the state policies only. So for instance, government's decision to open new university or hospital area ignoring the demand from some other area may cause an agitation which may become riots or violence. So this is an example. So the government may react with extensive use of force to stop that violent event. Second is participation by design. So this occurs when the governments, particularly its officials, take side in the conflict and use state resources to support a particular faction. So there are many instances where state takes side of a particular party who are involved in a conflict, and they use state resources to, you know, support that particular party, among which they have connections. So the government becomes a conflict participant. The role of the government should be maintaining peace and order and law and order in the society, but here we can see that there are also many instances where government becomes the conflict participant in a situation where its agencies are seen to be actively involved in the perpetuation of violent conflict. Such allegations are made particularly in cases of ethnic or communal conflicts. So, at on which situation states are being biased, and people considered, they put allegations on them when majorly the cases of ethnic and communal conflicts arises. So there can be instances of failure to alleviate local scarcity or unequal treatment of communal groups. So in many societies, government is seen strongly connected to a particular ethnic group or community. So we can see that maximum of societies have their base in a particular community or ethnic group, because they are the person who vote for them, and that is why on a conflicting situation they take side of that particular party or particular party of that conflict, and gets involved in the conflict itself. So the fact that government may be seen as a direct or indirect cause of communal or ethnic conflict, and may be actively or passively supporting one side in the conflict, or appears to create significant obstacles for its potential to serve as a third party and help resolve the conflict. There thus come up reports and allegation of human rights abuse. Now let's go and move on to the concept of civil society. So we are forwarding, and now we will be learning about civil society. Civil society plays an important part in the proper functioning of any democratic state. So civil society is something which is very very essential, so that a government or a state can run democratically. So it plays the role of a watchdog. So it is the civil society which has a role of a watchdog, and they concentrate on that how the power of the state is increasing or decreasing. So they have their own way to identify that whether they are mostly against the concentration of power by the state, and it helps to initiate, promote and strengthen dialogue between government and the people. So, in this way, civil society advances human rights, foster conflict resolution, and promotes better democratization processes. So, because of its flexible, multidimensional, and non-rigid structure, civil society has the capability to adapt to rapid global changes. So, broadly, by civil society, the reference is to that metaphorical space between the family and the state, where people, as right-bearing citizens, enter into associational forms of life to engage with the polity. So it is distinct from entire society, distinct from the force bearing structures of the state and the commercial interest of the market. So the World Bank definition. So the World Bank's definition of civil society refers to the wide array of non-governmental and non-profit organizations that have a presence in public life, expressing the interest and values other members and other bases of ethical, cultural, political, scientific, religious or philanthropic considerations. So, how World Bank is defining civil society? So, it is a wide array of non-governmental and non-profit organizations which have their presence in the public life, and they express their interests and values, and other members, others basis of ethical, cultural, political, scientific, religious, and philanthropic considerations. So, specifically, the term civil society, or civil society organizations in short form, we can also say CSO. It is referred to entities such as community groups, non-governmental organizations such as NGOs are a subset of civil society. So not whole thing, but for their labor unions, indigenous groups, charities, faith-based organizations, professional associations, and founders are also there. So, civil society is considered to be intrinsic to a well functioned democratic state. So, it is very, very essential for a state to remain a democracy. Civil society plays a very important role, which acts as a watchdog on how the state is performing and whether there is a concentration of power by the state. So, some argue that the development of civil society requires a freedom of speech, of association, of religion, and independent judiciary and democratic political institutions. Now, let's talk about civil society and the conflict resolution. Civil society institutions perform a significant role in conflict prevention, containment, and resolution. So, civil society is very, very important because they also help in preventing a conflict. They can also help in containment and resolution. So, it is worthwhile to refer to this point at some length. So, ordinarily, it is the state that has near monopoly in ultimately prescribing and implementing the conflict resolution that we have read. But because the cause of the conflict keep on increasing and the state, even otherwise, cannot always effectively function in this regard, civil society institutions entered the scene in a big way. So, in particular, the very spread of the idea of participatory democracy introduces, among other things, two important claims of participation of the people. So, the first is for the claim for more equitable sharing of society's resources and the access to the enabling rights and privileges that present day states are obliged to concede to people. So, the second claim refers to the very demand for participation in society's governance. Both of these points can be well illustrated from the human rights claim in society and the wide popularization of democracy's decentralization. Now let's move on to learn about women, peace and security. So when it comes to role of civil society in addressing the conflict and building peace, women also play a central role in it. So the upheaval of violent conflicts and the transition to post-conflict situation impacts everyone. But women and girls face particular impacts. So, in general, women and girls have access to fewer resources to protect and sustain themselves, and also aspects which get further heightened during war times. So, in the peacetime, also, women get very less access to resources that is there, that is, provided by the state or there is available in the society. And just imagining during the war times, that also resulted into scarcity of those resources, which is ultimately very less. So women and girls often become the deliberate target of gender based violence. Young girls are the first ones to be pulled out of school and married early. So, whenever there is a conflict going on, whenever there is a violence going on, it is women who became the target and became the victim of gender based violence. And there is a fear that always there in the conflicting situation, and because of that fear there are many young girls who being pulled out of the school and married early, so that it is believed that women are the honor of the family, and to save that honor women are the one who sacrifice their lives for their family's prestige. So besides suffering physical and psychological violence of dislocation, loss of their menfolk, women carry the double burden of survival and care of the family. So it is up to the women who have their own problems with them, but they are also given the burden of both survival and taking care of their family. Groundbreaking UN Security Council Resolution 1325 calling for women's participation in peace building was passed in the year 2000. So there is mounting evidence that women are powerful actors in sustaining peace in their communities and even nations. So when women lead and participate in peace processes, peace lasts longer. Do note it down, because it is seen that whenever women lead and participate in the peace process and try to handling the conflict, the peace lasts long. Research shows that achieving gender equality helps in preventing the conflict, and high rates of violence against women correlates with outbreaks of the conflict. Let's talk about the mass media. The mass media are the technological tools by which information can be communicated and transmitted to millions of people, as we have already know about this, and it takes place through the mass media. So the mass communication is the process of delivering information, ideas, attitudes, entertainment, and there is also messages to the sizable and diversified audience through the use of media developed for that purpose. So you can also categorize and classify mass media into following categories. The first category is the print, electronic, and new media. So print media, basically, you know that it is about newspapers, magazines, journals. The electronic media is DVD, film, video, TV, through which it is the information is being transmitted. The new media is internet, mobile technology. So this is considered to be new media, which have a greater audience reach. So it reach to millions of people. Second classification is the public sphere. So according to Jürgen Habermas, in his book The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, explained what is the concept of public sphere. So the media today is regarded as an important constituent of the public sphere that provides space for civil society to debate, to articulate diverse ideas, and doing so influence the decision of the state. So the public sphere is the notional space existing between civil society and the state. So, according to Habermas, the media is the public sphere's preeminent institution because it facilitates the rational debate of the citizens. So, the concept of public sphere was proposed by Habermas in the year 1989 to refer to the discursive space in which individuals and groups can come together to freely discuss and identify societal problems, and through that discussion influence political action. So, this is why public sphere is very important. Next comes the journalism. So almost all journalism in India as it exists today grew out of citizen journalism. So it was the urge to express themselves and be an active part of the public sphere that made the freedom fighters set up newspaper establishments. So the tools available for this kind of expression have greatly evolved, primarily due to the advancement of the technology. So beside that, the term citizen journalism comes from television. So this is also important, that from where does this word come, citizen journalism. So citizen journalists are now increasing seen as source of news, and the concept of citizen journalism has garnered every medium, whether it is newspaper, magazine, television, internet, or radio. Now let's talk about media in the post-conflict society. There is a reliable news media enables well-informed citizen decision making that, when freely exercised in turn, contributes to democratization. So relatability here refers to journalism that is accurate, impartial, and socially responsible. So, in Western practices, the gathering and presentation of information by the news media is distinguished by at least three key principles. So, what are these three key principles? It is the accuracy, first, impartiality, and the responsibility in the public interest. So, these are the three key principles. So, these principles apply to reporters, editors, etc. And the international community has recognized the place of the media in a post conflict society and its importance in the process of democratization. Now, let's talk about media and peace building. Professional journalists working in the media do not set out to reduce conflict. They seek to present accurate and impartial news and thereby aid peace building. So, there is often through good reporting that conflict is reduced. So, that is also a possible way. So, there are several elements of conflict resolution that good journalism can deliver. So, these are the 11 points that you can see on your screen are the, elements, several elements of conflict resolution, which includes education, channeling communication, etc. Now let's move on to Mahatma Gandhi, who was a great mass communicator. Mahatma Gandhi was a great mass communicator, and he left out no means, no technique to rouse the consciousness of the people, instill into them the imperative of their active participation in the movement. So, as a communicator, Gandhiji used medium of the press apart from the spoken word. So he sponsored journals such as Indian Opinion, Young India, and Harijan, which came out regularly, and it was a one-man endeavor conveying his message to his countrymen. So the importance that was attached to the written word by Gandhiji and other national leaders reflected their urge to reach out their message to as wide a section of the people as possible. Now let's briefly move on to our unit 7, that is role of international and transnational institution. We have done with our unit 6, now we are moving towards unit 7. International institutions are of two types, governmental and non governmental. So, the term transnational organization or TO in short form refers to the international organization which includes international government organization IGOs, international non governmental organization that is INGOs that transcends the idea of a nation state. So IGOs, that is international governmental organizations, are organizations whose members include at least three states that have activities in several states and whose members are held together by formal international agreement or a treaty. So in last century, more than 38,000 IGOs and INGOs have been established. So this is a very big number and it is doing its work to prevent conflicts and establish peace in the society. So the former includes many, among others, that is, the IGOs include many, such as the United Nations, World Bank, the Council of Europe, African Union, and the Organization of the American States. The latter, that is, international non-government organizations, are also there, such as Amnesty International, very famous, International Community of Red Cross. There is also Peace Brigades International, and also Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research. There is another one which is known as International Community for Artists and Artists for Peace. So let's talk about the role of international organization to promote world peace, basically the role of UN and the other international bodies. So UN is truly a global intergovernmental organization. It was established in the year 1945, 24th of October, to achieve the following aims. So these are the aims which we are now going to study, that is there written in UN Charter. So the first goal, first aim of UN was to preserve peace in the world and eliminate war. Secondly, to remove the cause of the conflict by encouraging economy, social, educational, scientific, and cultural progress throughout the world. So UN believed that there should be more economic, social, and educational. There is interconnections between the countries so that it can also reduce it can also reduce conflict and bring peace. So to safeguard, the third point is to safeguard the rights of the individual human beings and the rights of the peoples and the nations. So in spite of the careful framing of the UN Charter, the UN was unable to solve many problems of the world due to Cold War between the US and the former USSR. So it played a very important role. UN played a very important role in a number of international crises by arranging ceasefires and negotiations and providing peacekeeping forces. So its successes in non-political work such as care of refugees, protection of human rights, economic planning, and attempts to deal with the problems of the world health, population famine have been enormous. Let's talk about how successful has been the UN as a peacekeeping organization. This is a very important question. Although it has had mixed success, it is probably fair to say that UN has been more successful than the League of Nations in its peacekeeping forces. So what is League of Nations? So League of Nations is the first international organization that was created after the First World War ended in the year 1919. At that time, League of Nations was the first, and United Nations is the successor of League of Nations, because League of Nations failed by the starting of the Second World War, because League of Nations ultimate aim was to prevent any Second World War, but ultimately Second World War happened and League of Nations failed. So United Nations was the successor of League of Nations, which again wanted to establish peace in the society after the Second World War got over. So it especially in increase in crisis which did not directly involve the interest of the great powers, such as the civil war in the Congo. On the other hand, it has often been ineffective, like the League, in situations where the interest of one of the great powers, that is the USSR, were involved. So this is because the USSR was ignoring and defying the UN. The best way to illustrate the UN's varying degrees of success is to examine some of the major disputes both during the Cold War and the post Cold War time period. Now let's talk about the arms race and disarmament. Since World War II, global military spending is increasing. The end of the Cold War has not made much difference. So after the Second World War, ultimately the Cold War started between USSR and USA, and because of that Cold War, there were many, many countries involved in that Cold War. They were spending more money on military to gather military equipments, to gather, armed forces, many instruments that need many weapons. So this is why the military spending got increased after Second World War. So the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute yearbook for 2013 discloses that the annual global military spending stands at US dollar 1.756 trillion at current prices for 2012. So this corresponds to 2.5% of the world GDP, or approximately $249 for each person in the world is spending on military expenses. So the UN budget is also equivalent to just 1.4% of the current US defense budget. In fact, UN budget is equivalent to 1 month of US military spending in Afghanistan in 2010. Just look at the the numbers. This is very attention seeking, because the amount which US is spending on military, the same is the budget of the United Nations for 1 month. So naturally, arms race between and among states will not contribute towards peace at all. There is also a problem of illegal sales of weapons in the black market. That also is a very good, very big reason why conflicts are not going to over in short time. Now let's talk about terrorism and counterterrorism. The United Nations has consistently addressed the problem of terrorism at both the legal and the political level. It has also been the target of terrorism. So UN has also been the target of terrorism. From Afghanistan to Algeria, from Iraq to Pakistan, the UN staff members have lost their lives in the line of duty, in the service of peace, human rights, and development. So there are many, UN staff members who have been killed by the conflictors, by the people who are involved in the conflicts. And the UN Counter Terrorism Committee was created in 2001 September by SC resolution following 9/11 disaster in New York in 2001. So this 9/11 in 2001 was a very big landmark, after which there was a serious concern for the security. The UN has also adopted the following conventions and protocols on terrorism. International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism in 1999. There is also, you can see in your screen that there are many protocols on terrorism that UN has adopted over time. So the date is also mentioned. You can also note it down. So these are again many conventions, many sources, many the you can say there are many protocols that is being passed by the UN so that they can reduce the conflicts and bring peace more. Now let's talk about the University of Peace. So in December 5, 2015, the United Nations mandated University of Peace commemorated its 35th anniversary. So it was established by the United Nations General Assembly through the Resolution 35 by 55. So that is the mission of the university that is written in italics. So as it commemorates its 35 years of experience, the University for Peace is undergoing a process of strengthening its core mission. And for that, there are four essential pillars of the United Nations for this mission. First is to the ongoing search for peace, the promotion and protections of the human rights. There is also adopting measures conducive to the sustainable development. They have also achieving consensus among all actors around the urgent need to halt and serious impact of climate change. So these are the four essential pillars that it requires to maintain peace. Now let's talk about the role of regional organizations. So some of the IGOs were established with the aim of providing stability and security in their region. So one of the significant, international governmental organization is in the contemporary world is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was established in 1949 and it tried to provide collective defense against the Soviet Union threat. So it was formed during the Cold War period. So after its dissolution of Soviet Union and collapse of Berlin Wall, NATO's role was changed. And due to the impact of the increased globalization processes, so it now the member states that comprise this group required its security mission to be conducted in a larger context. So as a result, new associations such as Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council or Partnership for Peace, these are the new associations that have been created. Let's talk about Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research. So TFF in short form is a transnational organization. It was established on 1st of January 1986 and it is done by Christina Spanner and Jan Oberg as an independent not-for-profit public charity under Swedish law. So it is an independent think tank, a global network that aims to bring about peace by peaceful means. So it also inspires passion for peace from the grassroots to the corridors of power. So the theme of TFF, that is Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future, among others are non-violence, non-reconciliation, forgiveness, media, war and peace, nuclear abolition, and pro-peace inspiration. So these are the themes on which Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research is working on. It promotes conflict mitigation and reconciliation in general, as well as in more targeted way in a selected number of conflict regions through meticulous on the ground research, active listening, education, and advocacy. The foundation is committed to doing diagnosis and prognosis as well as proposing the solutions. It also does not clear pro-peace matter. So let's talk about now the non-governmental transitional organization, transnational organizations, particularly the International Committee of Artists for Peace, ICAP. So this is an organization of passionately committed individuals using the creative power of the artists to build peaceful society. So they use their creative knowledge and so that they can bring peace in the society. So they have collaborating with individuals and organizations that share its mission for peace. ICAP, that stands for the International Committee of Artists for Peace, employs dialogue and the full creative power of the arts to instill the ideas of humanism and non-violence in today's youth. So since the year 2002, ICAP has sponsored concerts, exhibits, and dialogues in support of the UN Declaration and Program of Action on a Culture of Peace. So the mission of ICAP is to establish peace and foster peacemaking through the power of art. And how it does? So it does through performance. The first is performance. So members of ICAP across a wide spectrum of genres perform the fine art of reconnecting with the audience with their humanity. Secondly, there is education through mentoring and arts. So ICAP artists share their talents and visions of peace with youth through school workshops, seminars, and joint performances. There is also awards and scholarships. So the ICAP recognizes and rewards the individuals and organizations that contribute to making the arts a vehicle for creating peace. There is also collaboration. So they facilitate peace and performing arts activities and events with other like-minded organizations towards creating a groundswell movement for peace, culture, and education. They also exhibit. So ICAP sponsored peace and culture exhibitions have been presented at schools, organizational events and conventions. Their traveling exhibit Building a Culture of Peace for the Children of the World was produced in support of the UN International Decade for a Culture of Peace and Non-Violence for the Children of the World and has been showcased worldwide. So here we can see that this is how we have done our two chapters, which is about Unit 6 and Unit 7. We have learned about how international, governmental organizations and non-governmental organizations work together to bring peace in the society. Peace is the ultimate goal of any government, any state, because if there is no peace, there is no moving forward, there is no development of the country. Peace is ultimate goal, and if there is no peace and there is often conflicts and civil wars going on, there is nothing can be done, there is no moving forward, it's always going backward. So with this, I end my lecture here today. Thank you.